We're with Richard Leider. He is a best-selling author and lecturer and, of course, life coach. And we've been drilling deep into some of the concepts that have really been key to your work.
Yep.
Calling is one of them.
Calling is as core to my work and my being as it gets. I've spent a lifetime digging into this concept, and calling can be seen as a kind of a big abstraction or a big philosophical. Actually, when you look at calling, it's usually about work and about vocation, and vocation came from vocare, to be called. And we often think that calling is for special or elite or priests or something, but I just have a job. And I make the distinction between jobs, careers, and callings. And I got this distinction, as a career counselor and as a career coach a long time ago, but who really gave me the distinction was Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, who was very instrumental in my own awareness, my own growth, and I spent a week with him way back when I just got out of counseling graduate school, and he was coming to this country, and he'd been in a concentration camp, but his whole thing was about meaning. So he gets up in first day in this conference, and I'm just like completely in awe of a guy that I've studied, and now I'm seeing him in the flesh, in person, and the crowd is hanging on every one of his words, and it's not a big crowd. There's maybe 75 people in, which is not large because he draws large crowds. But he had an old chalkboard in this place back in that, and he drew this line, and he said, "Now, ladies and gentlemen, you draw this line on the board. And this line is a horizontal line, and on this side, the left is success. This is a line of success. On this side is low success. On this side, it's high success." So everybody in the room can see that they feel either successful or not successful somewhere along the continuum. But he said there's another line. And he said that line is fulfillment. And he drew a vertical line right down the middle. So now we've got 4 boxes. Success, fulfillment. Fulfillment, low fulfillment down at the bottom, high fulfillment at the top. And then he goes on to say, in this lower left-hand quadrant, what we have is a job. You ever had a job? I have. I'm not talking just about, but a job, when people say they have a job, what do they usually say? I do this to
earn a living.
Earn a living,
Sure.
Make a living, of course. I don't expect that I'm going to go all the way up the ladder of success, and probably not looking for a lot of fulfillment. I'm doing this to pay for fulfillment somewhere else, right? So that was the first left-hand box. The next box over, up the success ladder, he wrote in career. And he said there's many people who are going up the career ladder, so to speak, or the professional ladder, or the growth ladder in their work, who would call it a career. It's more than just doing it for a job. They're developing themselves. There's some sort of maybe more connectivity with it. And he said, so that's a career down there. But he said, why is it so many people down in that lower right-hand box struggle with EV? And EV, the letters E and V, stand for existential vacuum.
An existential vacuum.
It's kind of like what I was talking about earlier in Inner Kill. It's like, I'm up there, but it doesn't feel great. It doesn't, I'm not getting up in the morning really wanting to go do this, even though I'm getting paid well, and people say, well, relax, you're da-da-da, but something's missing. Not for everybody, but for many people who are low on fulfillment down here, but high on career success. So then it got interesting, because in the upper left-hand box, he wrote in the word mission. Mission is high fulfillment, but not necessarily high pay or high success. And so many people at different points in their life feel like they really want to do something they care about, but they can't make a living doing it. And maybe later in life they might do it. So that's an interesting category. But where I play, where my work is in the upper right-hand box. and he wrote in the word calling. So we've got job, we've got career, we've got mission, but calling is success with fulfillment, where we're doing things, that's what I want, right? That's what we hear from different people. Well, certainly I want fulfillment, but can you eat? Can you make a living?
Right.
With fulfillment? How do I get success with fulfillment? Well, the key is, first of all, to push the pause button and step back and look at what is it you bring to the work world. Are you willing to pay the price to do a calling, not just a job? Because it takes a bit of work, but I've developed a formula.
I was going to ask you,
Yeah.
How do you find your calling?
So that's what I've been working on for many years. So the formula is G plus P plus V equals C. G stands for gifts, P stands for passions, V stands for values, equals calling. So if you're using your natural enjoyed gifts on things that you care about or are interested in, at least, you don't have to be overly passionate, but at least you're interested in using your gifts in the service of this product or this clientele or this kind of service in the world. And then the third is values, and that is, values is a little bit tricky, but that's the culture where you work. So a lot of people are using their gifts on things they like their job, they like what they're doing, but they don't like where they're doing it. It could be their boss, it could be the team, could be the physical culture, but somehow, oftentimes they don't have a voice in matters. They feel like they're not recognized for what they really bring, or they don't have a voice in the culture. They don't fit with the teammates. There's a values conflict in certain ways. The V happens to be the number one knockout factor in career research. People oftentimes, they don't leave jobs, they leave bosses, they leave cultures. They'll go someplace else, even for less money, if they feel like there's a great fit there. And you see that even working within an organization, moving to a different part of the organization. It's like same organization, different culture working with this boss or this team or this environment. So that's the formula. Now the key is how do you figure that out? But the equals calling. And calling is the inner urge to give your gifts away, the inner urge to want to get up in the morning and do this. And so it's a gut feel. It's not just a formula that you can measure all the time, but you know whether you want to get up and go do this. What are the characteristics that makes good work or right work right for you? Well, it's gifts, passions, values. So I've developed this tool called calling cards. And I cannot tell you how powerful I find this tool to be. I use it myself on a regular basis as well. What it is basically, I researched gifts for starters. And I tried to say, there's a lot of inventories out there. You can take them online or you can fill them out, but it's always somebody else assessing you. It's always, check the box and they'll tell you what you're good at, or, and many people, as you know what they don't love to do.
That's easy.
But they don't know what they do love to do and what the real distinctions are in that. And they think it's all about just what they're good at. Calling cards are not what you're good at. They're what you love to do. Now think about that. That is a huge distinction. Well, what if I'm not good at it? Well, hold on. Let me explain how calling cards works. So I studied what are the most generic gifts that I have learned as a coach and as a researcher, et cetera, that I could drill it down into like a deck of cards. So calling cards is literally a deck of 52 cards, divided into 6 suits or 6 different components. And so the way it works is that if I have you and I'm doing calling cards with you, I'd say, first of all, I'd tell you how this was developed. And I followed a lot of people around, and I looked at what they enjoyed doing and tried to see what showed up over and over. I mean, there's 7, 8, 9 billion people on Earth, but only 52 cards. So they have to represent, pretty universal gifts. And then you can translate or interpret. But I've used them all over the world. I've used them on every continent other than Antarctica. And they work. And so what you do is, you have these 52 cards. And the first step is, I tell you to spread them out. Put them all on the table, mix them all up. Spread them out so you can see all these different gifts. Gifts are things like...
communication?
There's 6 categories of gifts. One is artistic gifts. One is investigative gifts. One is realistic, hands-on. One is social, interactive. One is conventional, kind of keeping the wheels on type of thing. And one is enterprising. And those are kind of 6 categories. But there's everything from like fixing things to writing things to even straightening up and things, and getting to the heart of matters, and awakening spirit, and it's very, it's surprising how this works. So you got them all spread out. So that's step 1 out of 3. Step 2 now, as you look at those, I'd say, Kathy, now what I want you to do is is to sort all 52 of those into 3 piles. Pile 1 is, I love to do this. And if I was coaching you, I'd say, okay, I'm not asking you whether you're good at it. I'm saying, do you love to do this?
Which is
you
different.
get up in the morning and want to go do this. Let's start there, because that's the question most people don't ask. They ask what you're good at, and then you keep going back to the past. But if we're talking about the future and creating the future, you got to look at what you love to do, because otherwise, what's the point? Second pile is the things you don't love to do. So for example, one of my no pile is fixing things. Now my interpretation of that is like fixing things around the house. Now it's not that I can't do it, I don't love to do it. When I go home, it's in my honey-do jar, I'll get around to it, but some people go home and they can't wait to fix things. That's part of what they love to do, the third, so these are not 3 equal piles, they're just 3 piles. So then the third pile is, I can't decide. It's kind of your out pile. All right, so now you got 3 piles. Some distinction here about what you love to do, what you don't love to do, what you're not sure about, which is more career counseling than most people have had in their lifetime at this point, really. So then the third step is just go to your yes pile and you just pick out what you love to do. I want you now, Kathy, to pick out your top 5 cards. Only 5 out of 52.
Really?
Leave the rest of them there, we'll get back to them. But then I want to know what your top 5 cards are in order. In other words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So,
That's tough.
Yeah. So people can they struggle, but they love it because they're making distinctions now based on what really draws them. Not their history, not their degree, not their past, but what is going forward they really love and want to do going forward. So now you have those top 5 cards. So for example, for me, my number 1 card, which can only be interpreted or translated by you, by me, the individual. My number 1 is awakening spirit.
I'm not surprised.
My number 2 is creating things. My number 3 is designing things. There's a distinction there, and it goes on. So then we take those top 5 cards and we take a look at, well, what does this look like? What would I do if I was using these gifts? So then we plug those gifts into the gifts, passions, and values formula. And what does that look like? What would I be doing? What is the work I'd most love to do? Let's take a risk here. Let's start with a vision of what's maybe possible here. Let's reimagine or imagine the possibilities.
I love this.
So let me give you a real life example. You probably even know this person, but one of my neighbors came to me when I first moved into the neighborhood, and I live in a very small little neighborhood with only 9 houses, but when we first moved there, he came down and he said, I heard about what you do. I work at this major company in town here. I'm a manager, and pretty high-level manager. I've been there 20-some years, but he didn't say it in my terminology, but basically you're saying, I don't like to get up in the morning anymore. And it's affecting my marriage, and it's affecting my health. Not a wreck, but I'm just, it's just not working for me, and I'm hoping that they're going to give me the package, so I can get out of here. And I said, he said, can you give me a tip? And I said, so I handed him the calling cards. I put them out on my deck, and he did those 3 steps. And it took him, I'd say, 15 minutes max. That's all it takes, literally. I mean, you can do it in more depth, but that's for starters.
There's a gut feel here, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So 15 minutes later, he says, Richard, I got it, thank you. And he starts walking down the driveway, and I went, wait a minute. This is too good to be true. What did you get? And he said, oh my gosh, I'd never realized it before. These are like little mirrors, because what I realized was that there wasn't one thing in my yes pile that had anything to do with managing. And guess what I do all day, every day? I manage. He said, I hate managing. I like people, but I don't want to do this. He said, the way that to get paid and to move on was to become a manager. I became a manager, and now I don't like it. And I haven't ever really liked it, but I mean, I did it, and I did it okay. I said, well, then what's in your yes pile? Well, what was in his yes pile was really things about, I would call them a consulting role, an ombudsman role. He loved fixing things, but his fixing things was fixing organizations. He was a strategic type guy, not a management guy. He was a thinker about strategy and possibilities that way. And so his were more investigative and strategic. And so I said, are there any jobs like this in your company? And he said, yeah, we have an internal consulting outfit that does this kind of thing. And I said, well, why don't you go talk to them? Why don't you go explore? And he did. And it took him 7 months, and he made the move. It was a lateral move. It wasn't a promotion. And from a status standpoint, he took a dip because, he was no longer didn't have the title, wasn't the manager.
He was happier, I bet.
Well, once he made the change, he and his wife come down on the anniversary of doing calling cards every year to thank me. And I said, I didn't do anything. I just created the deck. You made the choice. And so that's an example of how simple it can be to take a look at, if you don't like it, what is it that you do like? What is it you do love? So, and there's something about the calling cards, and you can do a lot of different things with it. And I don't think I need to take it any further, but I do want to give you one other example. I think it's a really important example to this, and then I'll stop. But the thing that calling cards does is it triggers a different part of the brain. If you do a checklist or you get an inventory, it's kind of the left linear. But when you have to actually pick up a card and hold it and talk to somebody and say, this is what I love to do, the body never lies. If you don't love to do it, you're going to be like phoning it in. If you love to do it, you're going to like talk about it.
And that's what I meant by a gut feel. I bet you have a gut feel as you're looking at those cards.
But I want an example that you love it. Even if you aren't world class at it, you don't have a degree in it, there's all kinds of jobs that I have seen. People say, well, you can't make a living doing that. That's only because that's your perception. I got files full of stories of people who are doing a living with something they never thought they could do. Do we have time for a story or a quick
I would
story?
love to hear a story
Okay.
from you.
Well, this one I think is important for all of us. I have a client in Seattle who is a business owner who owns a medium-sized business who loves using calling cards with his team and with coaching in his organization. His wife, who is a former teacher, decided to stay at home, was ready to get back into the workforce. And she was trying to think, and so, but she always said, that stuff, she actually likes my books, but she never would do the calling cards when he brought it home. So he said, next time you're out, would you go to dinner with me and my wife and bring the calling cards? And I think because she likes your work, she'll do it. So we did. He went to this nice restaurant in Seattle, orders a nice bottle of wine, and a table over in the corner so we have room to do the calling cards. But I brought 2 decks, one for him to do on her, and one for her to do on herself, like I just did with you. which I do all the time. I recommend people, there's 4 ways you can be certain about whether these are your top 5 or not. And one way is to have other people do the calling cards on you, giving you feedback on
That's
what you love to do. So that's what I was doing with them. So they're doing the calling cards, I'm drinking the wine, and the waiters and waitresses are hovering around because, you know, they're not professional lifers. Most of these people, they're saying, during dessert, can I do these? Because I need to find a job, you know, beyond being a waiter. So it was kind of an interesting evening. So they do the cards, and I said, well, to him, why don't you give her feedback on her top 5 the way you see it? So he does. And I'm sitting there watching, and I see her turning red. And I see her turning angry and pushing back from the table. And she says, Mr. Leiter, Richard, we've been married 24 years. How could he not get one of my top 5 most enjoyed? And I said, because you changed. And he didn't notice. So, bottom line of that story is we change. This could happen to anybody. You could project what you want onto your spouse. You could project onto kids. You could project onto employees what you think they should want, as opposed to asking them what they do want and how they play. So that's what calling cards can do for you.
What a great concept.
Yeah.
Richard Leiter, thank you.
It really works.